pressure looks good.
Doubling up. Roger roll, Atlantis.
Water towers can fly! Yes!
Tango Delta nominal.
Body down, feed off. Bring in, let's feed off. Off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of NSF Live, the weekly show where we give a rundown of all of the space happenings in the world, or try to cover as much as we can. There's always a lot going on. Get your questions in chat, but before we get started, we'd like to go ahead and get some questions queued up. Tag at NASASpaceflight to make that more visible to us. I will be your host for today. My name is Stephen Marr. I'm one of the photographers around these parts, and joining me is Chris Gebhardt. How you doing, Chris?
I am doing well. How about yourself, Stephen?
Pretty good. And over on this side, we've got Adrian Beil. How you doing?
I'm doing great as well. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, let's get rolling. Let's get right into it, because I think that we've got quite a bit of stuff to talk about. And if you were paying attention earlier this week, NASA Spaceflight partnered with Stratolaunch to bring you live coverage. And we had a couple people out there in the field, Jack and Pauline, to give us some great footage. What do we know about this test flight that happened? How did it go?
Well, it went very well. The overall purpose of Rock flight number 4, Rock being the internal name that they've given to the aircraft.
And that's ROC, right?
ROC, yes, a mythical bird, named after a mythical bird, not the range coordinator that you hear sometimes when ULA later this week will yell out "Rock, report range status," different Rock. But yeah, this is the world's largest aircraft by wingspan. And it's a dual fuselage, like you see there. And this was its 4th flight. And very crucially on this flight was the first time that they fully retracted and extended all of the landing gear in flight. So, which might sound weird, right? Because aircraft leave the ground, right, Stephen and Adrian? And
Yeah.
the wheels go up. I mean, you feel that, you hear that, right? When your plane leaves the ground, it's kind of comforting, right?
Right, yeah.
But this is a very different aircraft, right? This is a one of its kind. Nothing like this has been out there before. So they have taken a very incremental approach to this test program. So on flight 3, they basically tested the overall retraction and extension on just one of, and there's like 20 some odd landing gear on there. So they only tested it on one on flight 3, got good data that gave them the confidence to say, okay, now we can actually test this as it's going to fly by fully retracting the landing gear. And all indications from Stratolaunch were that was successful.
And now, do all planes go through this sort of incremental testing phase where, like, okay, we're flying today and we're just going to raise one landing gear, and then the next time we're going to raise them all? Is that fairly normal to do that with new aircraft?
Not in the way that they're doing it here, because some aircraft, right, you can generate enough hydraulic force on the ground from hydraulic pumps to actually cycle all of the landing gear in planes. So like new Boeing 737, like new Boeing, new Airbus, new commercial aviation jets can sort of be put through their paces before taking to the air for their delivery flights. Although when they're first being developed, there are a series of test flights that take place with varying, kind of depends on how much the aircraft has changed from generation to generation.
Mhm.
But in terms of this very specific thing, they can't actually cycle all of the landing gear because they can't produce enough hydraulic energy on the ground. They literally need to be in the air with all 6 engines going to generate the hydraulic, the power needed for the hydraulic systems to move all of the landing gear. So one thing that Mason Hutchison, who was one of the Stratolaunch representatives on the stream with us this week, was talking about is so this was the first time they had fully and completely retracted them all at the same time, which was a really good milestone for them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And do we have an idea of sort of what's next?
Yeah. So what they sort of talked about is the next flight will have so what this plane is designed was originally designed to do, right? It was designed to take payloads up to 20, 30,000 feet and drop them, and then have the rocket motor ignite like an
Mhm.
airdrop launch, just like we've seen with other providers, right? And how airdrop launches work. The next part of the test phase that they were talking about is to install that pylon in the center portion of the wing between the two fuselages, where eventually the Talon A hypersonic test article that they are developing as well will be mounted on future flights.
Okay.
So the next flight is the flight with the pylon, per what they were talking about while Flight 4 was in the air.
Right. Okay. And am I out of my mind? Am I remembering this right? Wasn't there at one point a concept of putting a Falcon under the wings of the rock? Am I, or was it
They-
somewhere? Was it some other plane? And I've totally got that wrong.
There was an airdrop Falcon idea at one point. Yes, I know what you mean. Hang
Okay,
on.
cool. I thought I was just pulling that out of left field. Sometimes I can't trust my own memory, but I was like, it wasn't there at some point an idea to do that.
It was. It
And not just like
was.
people speculating and say, hey, that could be possible or whatever, but like it was like, kind of talked about and pursued maybe.
It was. It was the Falcon 5, and it was
Okay.
indeed strato launch. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And the Falcon 5 is what was gonna come after Falcon 1, and SpaceX ended up just moving right along to Falcon 9.
Yep.
Interesting. So what kind of rocket is going to launch on the rock?
So right now that is the Talon A hypersonic test vehicle that
Mhm.
Strato Launch is also developing.
So they are going to develop their own.
In terms of Talon A, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
All right. I just can't wait to see this thing. I mean, it's such a cool aircraft. You don't see anything else like that out there.
No, you don't.
It seems like when you look at it, you're like, how could that work? Because you've got two fuselages connected. It seems like it'd be all bumpy. I mean, it's got to be so strong to be able to make that possible, right?
Oh, it is. I mean, Adrian, what was your sort of take as you watched this test flight this week?
Yeah, I'm still watching it part by part because sadly, on the day it happened, I wasn't available. So I watch it right now part by part, and it's always when it's in the air, you always lose the sense of scale, how big this is.
Mm-hmm.
And once you see pictures from it on the ground, and once you see it being next to normal objects or people even, then you really get a sense of scale. Okay, yeah, this is a big plane, and
Yeah.
I just love it flying. I love these two fuselage connected by this bridge. It's such a cool looking design, and I was super happy to see so much footage in our stream here. That was really cool to see getting so much time here on air.
I was hoping that we'd get a couple questions here from the chat, and I do see one from James Atkinson. If they need all engines running to fully lower the landing gear, how do they cope with an engine out? That is a great question.
Which is a good question. So on the stream, that is what was said, but 6 engines is also the nominal operating sort of parameters for the aircraft. So without a strato launch representative here, I can't say if they just meant, oh, that's under normal operating parameters. It's a good question, but without a strato launch representative here, yeah, I
All you
can't
could do is
parse
really
exactly
speculate.
what was meant by that in yeah.
All right, cool. Let's see. I am not really seeing any other Stratolaunch related. We can. Oh, here we go. Sebastian Welter's wondering what is the wingspan.
Yes, the wingspan of rock. So we did mention that it was the largest aircraft by wingspan. So uh,
117 meters, right?
yes, it is 117 meters or 385 feet by wingspan, and it surpasses the Hughes H-4 Hercules, also known as Spruce Goose.
Oh.
The Spruce Goose.
He threw one up
yes.
for us, and we both let him down, Adrian.
Yes,
That was
so
very disappointing here.
I know.
So, it's bigger than the Spruce Goose by wingspan. Yes, and of course, this plane, what you were looking at too, like it's worth mentioning because we talked about being able to take a rocket up under it. It is designed to carry a 250 metric tons of payload, or 550,000 pounds, which is just incredible, and it has
Yeah.
a maximum takeoff weight of 590 metric tons or 1.3 million pounds.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, what this plane can lift off the ground is incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Adrian.
This whole plane always has this Kerbal-esque feeling to me because if you look at our Discord with the Kerbal channel, there's always air launching and
Yeah.
it's always similar plane design, and it's so cool to this concept being a concept that really is a thing in reality and not just a Kerbal thing. And
Yeah.
I love it. I love the idea. It's so different to what we are used to in terms of normal takeoff and landing. Or yeah, totally used to landing rockets at this point.
Yeah. And Paul Kelly was wondering, are there any customers lined up?
If
That we
there
know of.
if there are, Stratolaunch has not
Revealed them.
yeah.
I figured that would probably be the answer, but it's a good question, Paul. Okay, is that it for this? Is there anything else you'd like to add for the Stratolaunch test flight? Do we have an idea of when or no?
So that will be up to Stratolaunch to reveal once they have completed post-flight analysis and know exactly what they want to do on the next one. Like I said, the next one, per what we talked about on stream, would have the pylon attached between the wingspan here. But in terms of that, stay tuned to Stratolaunch's social media channels for announcements on when the next flight would be.
Well, cool. I think we timed that just right. Right as in our video clip, right as touchdown was happening. So very cool. We had a couple launches this week that we brought you live coverage of, starting with, and I believe it was Monday, and that would have been the Starlink Group 4-8 mission, and that flew from the Cape here. So this was the first Starlink launch after that whole geomagnetic storm thing, right? And so how did SpaceX adjust to that happening, to losing a lot of Starlink satellites to a geomagnetic storm?
Yeah. The usually height where they release it by about 120 kilometers, I think. It was 210 usually, and then now it's 325. So they increased it quite a lot to make sure it's higher, and even if they have to go into safe mode again, they're not straight up just dropping again into the atmosphere. So already one launch after this, they corrected what they think they can correct, and made changes so that they never lose a whole set of satellites again.
Yeah, and we talked about this during the stream, but it's worth noting that it's a sort of learning experience about the Earth's atmosphere, that it's not a fixed thickness. It can swell, it can shrink, and so just because you're safe at this orbit, there's it sort of gets into that debate of where does space start, right?
Yes. What is orbit? But that's an argument for a later day.
Right.
When we have Jonathan McDowell here.
Yes.
But yeah, that's why that's even like sort of a debate is because, well, the atmosphere isn't a set thickness, and on one day you might be able to stay in orbit based on the thickness of the atmosphere that day, but on a different day that may change. Of course, when you reach a certain altitude, you're pretty much going to stay in orbit. But when in that low Earth orbit, that altitude, the magic number there for staying in orbit can change.
It can, and in this case, so the initial SpaceX release for this talked about, a space weather event that triggered a geomagnetic storm
Hmm.
in Earth. So basically, that's a different way of saying the sun threw a bit of a tantrum that it does from time to time,
Yeah.
um, threw a bunch of charged particles at us in a coronal mass ejection that was not one of the like, uh-oh, we really need to panic and worry, like it's going to wreak havoc with things down here on Earth, like a Carrington style event from 1859. Nothing
Hmm.
like that. But what this particular geomagnetic storm did, and the sort of questions surrounding it, because I know there was a lot of like, well, wait, why would they launch if there was a storm? Why would they launch in terms of something like this? They launched and then it happened.
Right.
So this wasn't something they saw ahead of time and launched, and we got a prediction wrong, right,
Hmm.
about how much it was going to affect the atmosphere. The storm had not happened yet when the liftoff of the 4-7 group occurred.
Yeah.
But the solar storm raced across the solar system, and they can do this depending on the exact density of the interplanetary medium between Earth and the Sun at that particular moment. These coronal mass ejections can take anywhere from 16 to 32 hours to reach the Earth, and that's not a lot of time when you have purposefully left something in a low atmosphere and they have low thrust but high energy thrusters, so you
Yeah.
can't like just slam on the gas
Hmm.
and
Yeah, because
raise that
typically
perigee very
the Starlink
quickly.
typically the Starlink satellites take a while to get to their intended altitude, right? Like
Yes,
it's not just a couple days either.
and this is very calculated because some of them are not actually going into the plane that the rocket is launched into, right? There are many missions where a third of them go into that plane, so they
Hmm.
raise up immediately,
Uh-huh.
but the others have to drift into
Right.
the other
Yeah.
planes. And to drift, well, it's not, they don't go different directions, it's more like they just go the same direction at different speeds, orbital precession. So
Yeah.
sorry the hand didn't match the reality there. um but they have to stay at lower altitudes. The lower altitude you are, the faster that orbital precession occurs,
Right.
in relation to the ones around you and the sort of shells that you want to get into. So they're left at those lower altitudes in part on purpose to help facilitate that. So when this particular CME hit us and triggered this geomagnetic storm, it increased the density of the lower atmosphere at the 200-kilometer mark by 50%. I mean, those things were doomed at that
Yeah.
altitude. I mean, and I don't, and that's not a knock on SpaceX. There was nothing they could do for some of them. They were just doomed at that point because of the increased drag, even turning them razor edge. So, like Adrian said, this higher altitude, because you heard all of this in relation to Starship, in relation to the Starlinks, right?
Hmm.
But there was no emergency reboost maneuver on the ISS at 415 kilometers.
And actually, as you're saying that, a question's coming in from Andrew Folks saying, did the ISS crew need to do anything different during the solar storm this time?
Great question. So the ISS crew did not. The ISS was fine. In this regard, the ISS orbits below the Van Allen radiation belts, so they do not pass through them, which would be a concern if there was a crewed station in a highly elliptical orbit that passed through the radiation belts. This would have been a moment of concern for this particular geomagnetic storm, but that's why we don't have permanent human habitats in those particular radiation belt transiting orbits like
Hmm.
that. But of note, the Polaris Dawn mission will translate through them.
Mm.
So this is something that, for crew missions, this is something that we watch very, very carefully, where our Sun Sentinels like SOHO and Solar Dynamics Orbiter, and to a large extent as well, the Parker Solar Probe and ESA's Solar Orbiter, that are all sort of looking at the sun. Some of them are Sentinels, so they literally sit at L1 between the Earth and the sun and they just watch it.
Yeah.
and they wait, and there are sort of early warning system because the coronal mass ejections, the solar flares, the things like that will hit them first
Right.
and give us some indication of this might be how strong it is. And then you have Parker Solar and the Solar Orbiter, which are looking at the sun at different at different places and in different ways to try to unlock the mystery of how these coronal mass ejections generate, because we don't know how they are generated. They just bam, like we
They
can
just
just sort of
happen, yeah.
say there's a 20% chance one will happen, and when it does, maybe it's huge and maybe it's a nothing burger.
Yeah.
But we have no way to know that, and that's one thing that Solar Orbiter and Parker Solar Probe are really trying to help us understand for the types of predictions we might need to avoid another Starlink and to protect people one day as
Yeah.
well.
It's interesting now because with Polaris, with things like Gateway, and with Mars missions, that are topics that currently are not really a topic for the ISS discussion, for the ISS concerns, and we couldn't really learn to deal with it completely for now. But that's one of these things that we have to learn as humanity when we go deeper into space. So it's an interesting topic which will increase in relevance now that probably more humans will leave the very protective areas of the Earth once again and go to deeper orbits and deeper space.
Yeah, I think it'll future humanity will have to be able to get a good grip on like a certain star's activity much faster than what we're doing now. Like we're taking years and years and studying how our own star works, and in the future we're going to need to be able to roll up on a solar system and have a decent grasp on the solar activity there, right?
Yeah, and here's the thing: no two stars are the same.
Exactly.
And
Yeah, we
and
have
there,
one data point so far.
right, and there are a lot of the planets, the exoplanets in particular, that have been discovered so far,
Mhm.
orbit red dwarf stars, which have completely different radiation characteristics and sort of coronal mass ejection temper tantrum characteristics, and are actually a lot more volatile, which is one
Yeah.
of the interesting things that makes their habitable zones so interesting, because it's like, wow, the magnetic field you must have,
Yeah.
or life completely different from what we're used to,
Yeah.
So yeah.
And we can sort of continue this because we also had a launch from the West Coast, the Group 4-11
Yes.
Starlink satellites also. So, we'll roll some of the footage there and sort of continue the conversation because we have a question from Steve 180. Do we know if SpaceX may alter the number of Starlink satellites they deploy in the future based on space weather?
So the practical answer to that is no, because space weather is a very okay. So people who are watching, think of the time of year when the weather in your particular area is very dynamic, right? Where you kind of have an idea what it might be, but maybe it's a massive severe thunderstorm, maybe it's not, maybe it's a snowstorm, maybe it's this. But think of the wild swings that your weather can do on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm.
Now imagine you had no way to accurately predict that like we do here.
Yeah.
So how would you plan? And
Right.
that's a really good way to think of this, because we can't predict it yet. So when we can, maybe the answer to that changes, right? But until we can, you have a rocket sitting out there with 60 Starlink satellites. Let's say let's use the weird ones, 49 to 50 with the current group that they're doing.
Lately, yeah.
With 49 or 50 Starlinks, and it's already out there, and it's vertical on the pad, and the sun throws out a coronal mass ejection at you. Well, it actually would just take less time to wait for the effects of it to pass if you were concerned by it, if you saw it before liftoff, than to take it back horizontal, detach the payload, bring it back to the factory, take a few Starlinks off, put it back on the rocket, and by this point you've wasted a week, and you can put those back on.
Yeah.
At that point, because the event has passed. So the spirit of the question is very good, but it highlights the fact that we can't predict it well enough yet,
Right.
for that to be a factor. Yeah. But what we can do, right, is to see them coming in enough time to go like, okay, we think our crew will be fine, or let's get them back down.
Right.
If they're not at the station yet. We do have some degree of ability there, but I don't want you to walk away thinking, oh, we can very accurately do that.
Right.
No, we can't.
We're not.
We
We're
just
not
have an
quite there yet.
ability to, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, we will be in situations where we just can't pull crew back to Earth anymore, right? So,
Exactly.
for example, when you transit to Mars, you can't just turn around and go back to Earth. You have to have an environment where, in this case, even in these cases, the crew's safe and
Right.
there's no problem going on there.
Yeah.
So it will be interesting to see how very smart people that are very good at this come up with solutions to deal with these events that they need to consider for long travel to other planets.
Indeed.
Yeah. I think I've heard that like they can use water to shield, the meat bags inside, but you still have to worry about, the effects on the electronics and stuff on the outside, right?
Well, radiation hardening for biologics and technological, equipment, so to speak, on board. Yeah. But yeah, part of the radiation shielding on the ISS is water. Yeah.
hmm Yeah, interesting. I mean, we're still learning how to operate out there in space, and we have a long way to go. We're sort of we've been close to home for a long time. And actually, that might not be a good or might not be a bad time to point out. A lot of people will ask, like, why haven't we been back to the moon in 50 years? And well, it's good that we've taken all this time and learned how to operate while we're still close to home, right? Now, of course, we're going to go back to the moon soon, but living and working in low Earth orbit has really helped us get a firmer grasp on how to live and operate in space.
In general, I would say yes. But Adrian, I know you were wanting to say something there too.
I was going to a slightly different topic, so go ahead with what
Oh,
you
okay.
want.
I would argue yes, but I would caveat that with, in an ideal world, if NASA and the space agencies could have had the funding that they wanted,
hmm
both.
Yeah,
But
would have been nice.
but
Yeah.
given the funding realities that were in place and the systems that were in place, I don't think low Earth orbit was necessarily a mistake. No.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I'd try to look at what happened in the past and try to pull something positive out of it. I would have definitely loved to know that we had stations on the moon already, but
Yeah.
anyway, what were you going to say, Adrian?
Just interesting side note, because we talked about the SpaceX launch and didn't even mention that B-1058 flew for the 11th time.
Yes.
Right.
And landed successfully, because it's an achievement in itself that we didn't feel like we need
Yes.
to talk about reusability of this particular booster. So yeah, the
Right.
Falcon 9 landed successfully.
Well, to be fair, there's a coming section where we might be talking about the reusability potential of the Falcon 9s here,
Yeah.
and how this could be very helpful here. But your
And it
point
was
is
the
very
second
true,
one to
Adrian,
do it.
right?
It had already been done.
It's
Give me a
almost-
12th
I mean,
flight.
It's definitely odder now when it's like, oh, it's only flown 3 times.
Uh-huh.
A baby.
Yep. Yep.
We're so new to the fleet.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember quite vividly when the first one had reached 5 flights, and it was like
Oh
a
my God.
big deal,
Well, Stephen, I remember being there the day they relaunched one for the very
First time.
and I remember this like war between like the emotional side of my brain and the logical side of my brain, right? Where the
Uh-huh.
emotional side of my brain was starting to go down the like, okay, what would you do if this, and it's like, okay, stop it, like,
Yeah.
and then the reality sort of hits at a point where you're like, you are looking at this rocket. It is on 39A, which is the linchpin to space. At that point, SpaceX, as we didn't really know it was the linchpin to the US, Canada, Europe, and Japan here
Right.
potentially. but like you were looking at the linchpin for SpaceX's Crew Dragon program. They weren't going to take an unnecessary risk with that pad at that point.
Yeah.
Right.
Good point.
So you had that weird logic versus emotion. But I remember that day. And then I remember actually the first day where the launch happened, and I went, oh, wow, I didn't actually actively think during the mission that this was a reused booster.
Yeah. It looked like a normal.
And they were like within a year of each other. Like it was that quick.
It was. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was in 2017, right? I'm pretty sure that was when the first reflight was, because I think that was like my second or third launch I had ever seen.
First Falcon 9 reuse, yeah, because they lost Amos 6 in 2016, and they had not started reusing them at that point. Yeah.
I'm looking at chat right now for the first one to just
to blurt it out. Yeah, where's the answer? Well,
but yeah, I mean, it's a testament to what SpaceX has been able to do, right? In terms of first payload to fly on a reused first stage was March 30th, 2017. It was SES-10.
Cool. Yeah.
There we go.
I think it was like my second or third launch I'd ever seen. I was nervous.
And wonderfully enough, it was Falcon 9 flight 32, and for reference, they are currently on 142, having launched.
Goodness.
So that was 110 flights of the Falcon 9 ago that the first reuse occurred.
Wow.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Let's see. I'll go ahead and take this one real quick because we are talking about Falcon. Keith asking any news about just read the instructions or B1069. I don't think so. They're making their way back to port.
No. They're on their way back. No. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
1061.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 1069 is the one that had the hard landing. So no. They're no updates on that. No.
Yeah, no. We yeah, just read the instructions is back in action is the update. We've seen it actually
sorry, too many boosters. Too many
boosters but I can't believe I missed the name on that they mentioned in the drone ship. Just read the instructions is the East Coast drone ship, and of course I Still Love You is West Coast. But
B1069 had the hard landing on Just Read the Instructions, which took Just Read the Instructions sort of out of service for a bit as they had to do some repairs. And it left yes, and it is on deployment. So there you go.
Back in action.
Back in action.
Yeah, for the booster, I feel like it will be either a situation where suddenly it reappears and SpaceX will be like, "Hey, it's back," or
we never see it again.
Is a legit, I at least I feel like legit concerns. It also could be a long time, until we see that again, because it took some hit. Like they will of course inspect it, I guess, and just make sure everything, the structure of the overall booster is fine, and after that determine if they can reuse it or not.
Yeah.
So because the good thing at least is that it didn't hit the water.
Right.
We don't have saltwater issues. Like the one that went for a swim on CRS-16.
Yeah, I think there was discussion in the space community about whether or not they could reuse that one, and we've not seen that one reappear.
They will not. No. That one will not be reused. No.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. I think we can move on from Starlink discussion unless y'all had anything to add.
I think we're good.
Okay. Well, it was just revealed this week that Rocket Lab has a new pad ready to go, ready to support launches. And they shared it. Actually, we've got the video right here. It's a really cool video, and the soundtrack is awesome too.
It really is. It really is. But yeah, no, this is exciting, isn't it, Adrian? Because this is this is Pad 1B on the Mahia Peninsula in New Zealand. This has been A bit coming, but this is part of Rocket Lab's design in terms of increasing their launch cadence. So not only increasing in blah blah blah. Let me try that again. Increasing their launch cadence by recovering and eventually reusing the first stages, but also by having 2 pads in New Zealand and 1 in Virginia.
Mhm.
So this is pad 1B, and yeah, the fact that we will see it in action here tomorrow, if all goes to plan. It's February 28th UTC time and then March 1st in New Zealand, and of course tracking that liftoff 2035 UTC, which would be 1435 Eastern in the United States. 2019, 18, 17, 16,
Yes.
1535. 1535 Eastern in 335 Eastern in the US. So looking forward to that debut from pad 1B, because that's a cool photo. 2
Yeah.
rockets on 2 pads, always a
Mhm.
cool photo.
Yeah.
And I was
well,
wondering if
the 2 pads there. Yeah.
I think I know the answer to this question, but I was wondering if they would ever actually launch from one with a rocket on the other pad.
The answer,
I
I think,
Yeah, go ahead.
could I'm very interested to see how it looks like tomorrow during the webcast.
Yeah.
Because
maybe they'll have one out there, or have 2 rockets out there at the same time.
So I admit I'm running to Google Earth to do this
to see how close they are.
Bingo.
They look pretty close, and I think
they're
it's
very close.
yeah.
Okay,
I think it's unlikely that they would want to have 2 on the pad at once.
Yeah,
Other than for photo ops.
So the 2 pads are they are 1 strato launch rock away from one another. They are 117 meters apart from one another, or 386 feet.
Awesome.
I do not think they would have one out at the pad, to be totally honest with you. But I also know this, so this sort of depends on what their calculations are, right? With the 2 pads, they actually have 2 completely separate integration processes. So 2 completely different payload customers can be prepping for launch without any interference
Right.
with one another in the buildings that they have there. So that's a great question. Like Adrian said, we'll be curious to see how they have it set up tomorrow for the liftoff, but also curious to see what they say and what Peter Beck might say about their comfortability level in terms of where the other rocket can be while one pad is being used for a liftoff.
Right.
we could also see, for risk reduction, a situation where one rocket is probably lowered to horizontal, because then you're giving way less exposure in terms of potential failure in a situation like that. Also, this is only my second favorite picture of Rocket Lab this week, because there's one by Peter Beck that is from the bottom of pad B, with the engines being shown of the Electron rocket, which is just an amazing photo. I love that. I enjoy it a lot, and yeah, there it is.
There it is.
That's just a cool photo, and I'm looking forward to launch tomorrow, hopefully. And it's 3 launches for Synspective, right? There will be 2 more of this one more of this year, and 1 more of this in 2023. So 3 launches in total.
All right.
And the name of the mission is The Owl's Night Continues, which I love
that
because the first one was The Owl's Night Begins. So I like the continuation of the name in that regard. Yeah.
And one thing I think people are interested in, and Niche Ant asked, or I don't know if it's Nichant, saying, are both rockets red for recovery or just the next one? I know they're not recovering this one. Yes. So that answers part of the question. I think some people might be wondering, are they going to recover this one finally? Or I guess they've recovered some, just not from the air. We're looking forward to them catching one as it's falling, as it's parachuting down. They've got the helicopter thing.
So the Owl's Night Continue will not be recovered. No.
Right. It does have the red stripe on there that will in the future, I think, indicate recovery. I think Peter Beck has said that is an indicator of that, but they're not recovering because.
But it's important to note that just because they aren't physically going to recover it doesn't mean they aren't testing recovery.
Exactly. Yeah.
On it. So this could be one that while they don't plan to physically recover it, there still might be the recovery hardware, the advancements that they're testing. He's talked about, Peter Beck has talked about sort of the evolution that they've gone through since the first Electron was built to survive atmospheric reentry, but they didn't attempt to recover it. Right. So yeah, just different things I think will not be attempting to recover. Probably just means we're not putting a parachute on it, so it's gonna hit the water at terminal velocity.
Gotcha.
Yeah, they're all. There's this tweet that they're saying they're testing. They're continuing to test systems associated with recovery. So basically everything you just said.
Yeah. All right, and let me see if we had another. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to see if we have any other questions, but go ahead as I'm looking.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to mention because there is some interest in it, and we are getting fairly close to that. Just really quick, that the Capstone mission for NASA is still planned for next month, and that will be launching from Mahia in New Zealand. So the first lunar launch from New Zealand, but we're going to be expecting a lot more updates on this mission as it comes to the fore here for Rocket Lab and for NASA. And this is a capstone. It is part of the Artemis program. It will go and investigate the near rectilinear halo orbit that the Gateway and that some Orion missions will utilize to sort of gain information on what that environment is like before our spacecraft and astronauts get there. So a very important mission, not just for Rocket Lab, but for NASA as well.
Right. Yeah. Very cool mission. It's cool that Rocket Lab, being such a young company, is already taking part in the Artemis mission.
Oh, indeed.
Is this the first launch that is officially associated with the Artemis program, or was there one before that? I forget.
Well, there would have been exploration flight test number 1 with the Orion vehicle that I guess you could back up to the Artemis program. I mean, it would sort of fall under the Artemis program now, but it wasn't called. But to your point, wasn't called Artemis back then,
right?
And everything. Did Artemis have its name when Ascent Abort 2 happened in 2019?
Ooh, just off the top of my head, I think not, but I don't remember for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it would.
I don't always trust my memory.
It's and it's probably just to like how you personally choose to classify it. Like I would retroactively go back and say yes. Like when we gave the program a name, I would go back and say that the flights that preceded it are part of that program. We just didn't have a name for the program yet. We just sort of called it the SLS program, or the Orion program, or something like that. Yeah. So yes, but what's cool here? Do we have another question here, Steven?
I think so. Yeah. This one, someone just wondering if about their cadence. I guess Koa Kirakun saying, can Rocket Lab catch up with SpaceX in terms of total launch? I know they're a different class of rocket. Oh, where'd it go? Oh, and in a different market.
I think right now with the Electron as it currently is, that would be somewhat difficult for Rocket Lab just based on the manifests and everything that exists. And now it is worth pointing out that Electron is the second most launched U.S. vehicle after the Falcon fleet. So it does surpass the others with quite a with regularity now, I would say. So it is a well-used launcher in our system, but in terms of overcoming SpaceX's potential 40+ cadence a year, without internal missions like Starlink, SpaceX wouldn't even be close to that. So I don't think Rocket Lab's going to come close to that right now. No. Now, ask me that again when Neutron comes onto the scene for some things that they've got ready for that, and
there you go.
The answer might be different. Yeah.
All right, and then moving on, Rocket Lab had a pretty big announcement here recently. contract that they recently signed, right?
It was another announcement this week from Rocket Lab, this time specifically interacting with Globalstar and MDA, whose name might be familiar. MDA, a well-known space robotics company, specifically Canadarm, the mobile base system, Dexter, the shuttle arm, the Canadarm3 for Gateway. But Rocket Lab specifically signed a multi-million-dollar contract with MDA to lead the design and manufacturing of about 17 spacecraft buses for Globalstar and a new low Earth orbit satellite that they are developing. So, and Rocket Lab has been making a lot of these partnerships, which is very interesting, and why I wanted to point it out. Rocket Lab definitely seems to be a partnering force in the industry.
Yeah.
As well, which was very nice. Which was very nice to see. And for Canada too, and for MDA in particular, this was actually the first of a couple of announcements from them this week. Their second one came out a couple days afterward, and specifically related to their participation in lunar exploration programs. So we just talked about Rocket Lab's lunar exploration initiatives here, and MDA in particular, through the Canadian Space Agency, is conducting the Phase A contracts for the Canadian lunar rover systems
Hmm.
and everything. And part of that testing and manufacturing is ongoing. And they had an announcement with Concordia and students there completing wheel testing for the potential lunar rover that might come out of this Phase A contract for the LEAP program in Canada, which is all part of the Artemis program as well, and building that sustainable knowledge base to get us back to the moon. And you can see it here. You can see the wheel test underway in the lunar regolith simulator there. So
Yeah.
some good work and some good progress going on with that as well.
Yeah. It's cool to see so many people helping out with the work that we'll eventually do on the moon. I can't wait for us to finally just get there and get it all rolling. Really quick, I wanted to hit a couple of these super chats. Bob Brown, thank you for the very generous super chat there. We definitely appreciate the support. And also Jim Cavett, thank you very much. Let me see about these questions. They might be better held for later. Yeah, I'm gonna hang on to some of these super chats for later because they might pertain to future topics. And with that, we were going to talk about RadarSat.
Yeah, very, very quickly here, because of its sort of relationship to something else here. So the RadarSat constellation was launched back in 2019, and we recently spoke with one of the leads on that program, specifically about how it's being used in disaster management. The RadarSat constellation was actually the first constellation to manage to get synthetic aperture radar images in C-band of the ongoing volcanic eruption in Tonga when that was taking place last month.
Right.
And they were instrumental in a lot of the natural disasters that have taken place in the western portions of North America and around the world as well, with hundreds of activations for natural disasters around the world. And you know, the piece, it's on our website. It's very much worth reading how these things are used, not just for natural disasters, but for monitoring crop yield in various countries, to understand the crop inventory, monitoring sea ice and maritime shipping lanes. And even they can be used, which was something cool that I learned, that synthetic aperture radar satellites can be used to examine infrastructure, buildings, bridges, roads, things like that, to see how they are see how they're holding up.
Really?
Yes, and specifically to Canada, they are used in the Arctic regions that are very hard to access in the wintertime.
Okay.
But of course, they have the synthetic aperture radar has a relationship to something else that is going on in the world. And while our article very much focused on the natural part of this, a lot of the images that we have been seeing in the last 4 days from Ukraine are synthetic aperture radar satellite images that can see through all types of weather. This is sort of the use that we always kind of hope isn't what we have to end up using them for, to assess where to assess where attacks have occurred, and especially with regard to the current invasion of Ukraine by Russia. We have seen these images from some of these satellites being used to determine where battlefronts are, where engagements have happened by loved ones trying to figure out how close family members might be to some of these locations that are under attack. And, a lot of what we are about to talk about and the questions that we are about to take are going to go in the direction of what does this particular conflict mean in terms of space policy. But what is happening on the ground is the important part and is the focus here. And all of our thoughts and hopes and well wishes to everyone who is experiencing the unimaginable right now.
Yeah.
We don't want to gloss over that before we talk about effects on the industry that we report on. And we felt it very necessary to take that moment to stop and acknowledge and to express
Yeah.
our support for the people of Ukraine.
Yeah. Yeah, the most important thing is people and their safety and their loved ones. But we specialize in space coverage, and so we will talk about what sort of effects it might have on space assets.
And Adrian, there's a rather large and immediate one that we have seen.
Yeah.
Which obviously isn't of too much surprise, but talk to us about the effects that this is starting to have on the European space community.
Yeah, so what was announced is that Soyuz launches that were previously conducted from French Guiana are suspended for now, which is there are some payloads that could be immediately affected by this, including the Galileo payloads later this year, and I think it previously was net April. So that is an immediate effect we see here from this. The Soyuz spacecraft would be used for that. And of course, this is not including any more implications this could have for things like OneWeb and other European spaceflight operations. And it also limits the capabilities of European spaceflight as a whole right now. We have a situation where basically the Ariane 5 flights are numbered, where Ariane 6 is not ready for flight yet. It's not flying yet. And we have the Soyuz launches, which are now under even launches that are not conducted from French Guiana are probably under in a limbo right now. Mm-hmm. So it's not a good outlook for the European space program. And yeah, we have many projects going on that are more about small sat launches right now, but they are also not ready yet. We have not a small sat launcher right now that is a private company that is launching yet. So it's tough, and it's definitely not a situation that anybody would want to be in right now.
And I'm curious from your perspective, Adrian, you know, what do you sort of see developing as potential alternatives? You mentioned the Galileo spacecraft. They're launched in pairs on Soyuzes, and it's sort of, what do we see as the sort of launcher alternatives if there are no more places on Ariane 5, which we know there aren't. There are no more Ariane 5s left, and Ariane 6 isn't ready. What are sort of the options here if Soyuz isn't around?
Yeah, it's actually a quite complicated situation right now, because we have, I think, with Vega, you could probably maybe launch one. You can definitely not launch two like they would plan to on the Soyuz. And I think the other only candidate that is like really in the picture here would be the Falcon 9. Other than that, you have no rocket that really has the capabilities, A, or the availability. That's the two factors that always come into play. A, do I have rockets of this? And B, are they capable of doing this job? So,
yeah.
And what I know that a lot of times we talk about payloads having to select their rocket early on in their development, and so payload is sort of built to the rocket. How long and how much work, what sort of things would have to be done to switch a payload to a Falcon 9?
Yeah, so I'll answer this in terms of the generic answer to how you would switch a rocket this late in the game,
Yeah.
which some payloads can, like, and some cannot. But for the ones that can, what you would need to do is sort of go through and work with the rocket and the company that you're looking at to assess what the vibrational loads are on that rocket, what the acoustic environment is as it goes up. Basically, what are the things that the rocket is going to do to shake, rattle, and roll that thing as it's heading up, and then what are your separation forces, right? When the system separates you at the end of the flight. The other thing you need to look at is what are the G forces that the satellite was designed to maintain and not exceed during liftoff.
Yeah.
Because if you are G force limited to some degree, then whatever rocket you switch to would have to throttle to account for that, both on potentially first stage and second stage, depending on how powerful the rocket is compared to the size of the payload that you're talking about. And then the other major thing is making sure that the rocket in question can get you where you need to go. And this is where you said maybe Vega C can do one at a time, because these things aren't going to sun sync orbits at 700 kilometers where a Vega C can take 2,200 kilograms. These 780 kilogram Galileos are going to 23,000 kilograms. Sorry, 23,000 kilometers, into a medium Earth orbit. So they're going much higher, which requires a lot more propellant to get you there. So it's all of those things that you sort of have to trade off if you look this late in the game to switch vehicles.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you are even talking about. You're not talking about OneWeb that yet, because we still have the situation that
Right.
will OneWeb in the future launch on Soyuz? Because I would at least put my heavy doubts on that we will see OneWeb launches as planned in the future.
Yeah.
I mean, being owned in large part by the British government, that is going to be a major complicating factor in launching those on Russian vehicles from Russian territory. That's going to be a hard sell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that a lot of people are thinking about is how this affects the partnership on the International Space Station. Let's see, I have a couple of questions here.
Yeah.
Wesley Heron saying, should we be concerned about Vandenberg's return to Earth aboard a Soyuz? Will SpaceX need to have an open seat on a future Dragon?
I
was wondering about that too.
Yeah.
Like they land over, over in Russia.
So I would say this: they land in Kazakhstan, which is
not Russia.
arguably different. Yes. So they land in Kazakhstan. As of right now, I would not say that this is necessarily the biggest thing to be concerned about. In terms of Vandenberg's return, it is a question. I do not in any way discount that. Wouldn't say that's the biggest sort of question right now. If we needed to, could we potentially do something? So it could be, and here's why I say it's not that big of a deal, because you could end up doing something where you say, okay, someone who is up there right now on the Crew 3 mission. So it's Mark Vandenberg who's up there right now. So let's take Kayla Barron, because she's a mission specialist, right, on Crew 3. So you could end up doing something where you say, okay, Kayla, instead of coming back on Crew 3, Mark's coming back on Crew 3 in your seat, and you're staying. And you could start to do it that way if you got into a situation where they did not want, where Russia just said no, or we were not comfortable doing that.
Okay.
You could start to rotate it that way, so you weren't necessarily immediately sacrificing a person on the station.
Right.
And you could sort of continue to roll that forward from mission to mission to gain more information on year-long stays in orbit.
Okay.
So that's why I say that particular thing is not the biggest element to this, but it is part of the questioning and what's going to happen here. It very much is.
Yeah, and another question coming from Ticonderoga.
Yeah.
Do you think recent events will speed up the ISS decommissioning or prolong it in case Elon steps on board somehow?
Well,
I think they're going to try to avoid that at all costs.
As a few generations before me used to say, that would be the $64,000 question.
Yeah.
What happens? I mean, Adrian, we sort of have Rogozin beating his chest a little bit this week, which led to some interesting things. Do you want to sort of take us through what Dmitry Rogozin said?
Yeah, basically, I think the implication he did was that there needs to be boosting to the ISS orbit, right? And
it was a very weird statement to the effect of, oh, well, if Russia's not there, how will your precious station not come crashing back into America or Europe? I mean, it was very directed at those two partners in particular.
Yeah.
Well, here's the sort of complicating factor here, because we've heard a lot this week about, what happens if Russia just wants to detach their modules and go? Does that mean that the entire station has to be decommissioned?
Right.
Well, an interesting little sticking point here is that we own Zarya.
Right. And
Russia doesn't own one of their modules. We own it. Now, unfortunately, it's not the one with all the life support systems in it. That is Zvezda.
Okay.
But Zarya does have a lot of electrical power, that sort of thing here. But NASA owns it. Russia built it, but NASA owns it. So I don't think Russia can take that one away because NASA and the US segment, therefore, own it. So what happens? So this is from Pete Harding, who writes some of our ISS pieces, which sort of shows a notional configuration, but crucially without Zarya. And it shows sort of a configuration with a lot of SpaceX vehicles there. I think we can logically say we should put a Starliner here somewhere and maybe another Cygnus. And the Axiom modules are sort of in this realm, as well as Voyager Space sort of came out this week with something that could work too. But if we could pull up the Mac Crawford artwork here too, Michael, because this is one that shows Zarya still here and shows the sort of notional Voyager Space solution to this, which would be you no longer have all the Russian docking ports. You no longer have Zvezda. You no longer have Prishal and Nauka there, but Zarya is there because it's ours. And Voyager Space and the Voyager module sort of replaces Zvezda, right, with the control capabilities that we have that would bring, and sort of habitable volume as well. The other major option out there for what might happen and what could allow it to continue. So there are life support systems on the US segment. The Destiny Lab does have some life support systems within it. And the upcoming Axiom additions to the space station also are accounting for this. And we're already thinking about this because they needed to upgrade the life support systems on the US segment of the space station. And this is a good moment to stop and say the station is divided into two segments: the Russian operating segment, of which it is just Russia, and the referred to as US operating segment because NASA pays for the bulk of it. But the US operating segment includes Japan, Canada, and the European Space Agency. So when we say the US segment of the space station, we basically mean all of the partners aside from Russia in this regard.
Yeah.
Those Axiom modules were already accounting for that because of the increase in permanent crew. So they could be very crucial to this sort of equation of what happens if this really deteriorates to the point where Russia wants to leave. Now, in terms of reboost, really quick, NG-17, the Cygnus that just launched and got there, it was already planning to do a major test of its engine to showcase again how it can operationally reboost the space station. It tested this capability on a previous flight in 2018, but the NG-17 Cygnus will actually do it operationally. And this means that basically, to Rogozin's tweet, how do you prevent the ISS from crashing back in? We got it. It just launched, and we can and Cygnuses can do this. Now, to an extent, I'm sure we can also look at ways that potentially a Dragon could do it too. That would be a little tricky based on where some of the thrusters are located, but we have options. So that's sort of, what happens if? Nah.
Yeah.
Nah. We've got options.
We did have a related question. I went ahead and threw it up there. MooQ logins, I guess I'll say it that way. Can Dragons, Super Dracos reboost the ISS? I speculated that the thrust would be too high, but I'm not sure on that. I don't know that the thrust would be too high, would it?
You would not. I can answer this. It has nothing to do with thrust. You would not ignite the Super Draco abort system for a standard reboost. You do not use that system unless you absolutely have to for in-flight abort.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Yeah. So it would have to be the Dracos, but the Dracos aren't oriented in a useful
not that
way,
they're not
right?
oriented in a potentially useful way, just that the sort of conical design of the Dragon capsule sort of means that they all face the ISS to some degree. So you would have to do some thermal analysis, plume impingement. How would you orient it? Would it be best to do it when it's radially docked, when it's when it's on the velocity vector? You would have to do some other things with that to sort of figure it out, which is why I don't say it's outside the realm of possibility, but why Cygnus is our better option. And who knows if Dream Chaser will be able to do it too when it comes online as well.
Let's see. Six Strings Simpleton saying, if Roscosmos sends a command to deorbit ISS, can the crew on board override? And how many Dragon capsules are currently docked?
Okay, I understand the spirit of the question.
Is the answer going to be it doesn't work like that?
I would have a incredibly difficult time believing that Russia would do that with their own people on board. I cannot imagine them doing that in that scenario. I would have a hard time believing that we would get to that in any way, shape, or form. And from a just procedural standpoint, it takes about 3 hours to prepare a Soyuz to undock from the ISS if it's not like an emergency getaway procedure. So you would know. I mean, there would be warnings that things were I don't think it
Surely
would ever
they
happen,
wouldn't do
but
that.
we have procedures in place. This is how I can answer it. We do have procedures in place both on the Russian side and the U.S. side for the crew vehicles to be able to undock much faster than they normally do in emergency situations. And when the station sort of went out of attitude control, when Nauka malfunctioned after docking in July, one of the questions that I think I asked, as a matter of fact, in a briefing was, could a Dragon capsule in the Soyuz have undocked while it was spinning like that? And the answer was basically, it wouldn't have been ideal, but yes, they could have.
She could do it.
And gotten away, although not ideal. So again, I don't think we'd ever get there, but yes, our crew vehicles can get away very quickly if they need to.
Okay. We've got a lot of questions about this topic, so I do want to kind of stay on it for a minute. Sunny Rocket Love saying, what about spacesuit compatibility between Soyuz and Dragon? Like, I get what they're saying. Is it like, so if you're up there and your spacesuit is for Soyuz, could you jump in a Dragon and ride it home?
Yes, you could to an extent. But this is but there's a huge caveat here. Huge caveat. You wouldn't have a suit, so you would have to accept that as a reality. Now, Dragon gets a little hot. They pump, nitrogen in through the suit, to help you stay cool and everything. Would they opt to do it if it wasn't an emergency? I don't think they would. I really don't think they would. I think if we're talking about, and I think I know where this is coming from, if we end up talking about Mark Vande Hei having to come home on a Dragon, they would most likely either rush a suit for him or find one that might not be
There
the
you
most
go.
comfortable in the world, but it fits you and it's
But
going
we
to get you
have,
home.
we would
you
have, surely we would have his dimensions on file, like,
Well,
so
well,
we
well,
could
we-
make a suit for him.
We
right?
would, and this is great because Adrian, I think you know where I'm going. Talk about the Soyuz seats, because this is where we would have all of Mark's information, but this is where it also makes it very hard in the reverse for someone without a Sokol suit to come home on a Soyuz.
Oh. Right? Oh.
Oh, did you want to talk about that, Adrian? Sorry.
No, sorry, I was
Oh.
just agreeing. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I thought you wanted to jump in there and,
No.
and talk about it. I feel like I've been talking a lot this this episode.
No, I was totally listening in this case.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Sokol's, the Soyuz seats are custom made for each individual astronaut, and to some large extent, so are the suits. So it is very hard to come home on a Soyuz without a custom seat liner. And in fact, when we have had to do this thing where someone who launched on another vehicle is now landing on a Soyuz, or someone launches on a Soyuz but they're coming back on a different Soyuz, like that film crew had to do in October of last year, they literally transfer their seats from one Soyuz to another because they
cool.
are that custom made for each other. Now, again, do you absolutely need that in the Soyuz? It's a rough landing with that retro rocket fire. So yeah, but
Yeah.
like, so it's this sort of weird, like, in emergency situations, what are you willing to accept versus what can you plan for?
Yeah.
Is sort of the answer to that question.
Yeah, it's always about these situations. Usually, both space agencies try to reduce risk with everything they can. But in these situations, when the bigger risk is already there, you're talking about way more risk you're allowing to avoid this big thing you're trying to avoid. So it's always these: what do you really need, and what is just there to make it safer and to make it better for the current situation.
Exactly.
Sebastian is asking, do we know how many NASA and ESA staff are in Star City right now?
That is a great question. I do not. I do not.
Yeah. We don't know.
There is usually some form of a presence for training purposes. But that's a good question.
Yeah. Don't know.
But now, to be very fair, Star City is not in Ukraine. Let's be very, very clear about that.
Right.
Star City is not in Ukraine, and neither is Baikonur. Baikonur is in Kazakhstan, so it's not in Russia either, which is also kind of important still.
Yeah. And another thing I wanted to touch on really quick, and this question relates to it. I'm not even going to try to pronounce your name, but is Elon actually sending Starlink to Ukraine?
Yes.
Yes.
And Adrian, do you want to take this? Yeah.
Yeah, so he confirmed that on Twitter that Starlink was enabled in the Ukraine, and they will send dishes to support internet in the Ukraine. My God.
I think that is a wonderful use for Starlink.
Yeah, it also shows this is not the first time Starlink was used in regions where internet right now is a problematic situation. We had that in Tonga, I think.
Yep.
We had it here in Germany during the flooding, where Starlink also was used. So we had it in was it Florida during California, right?
Washington, Oregon, and Montana, and British Columbia have all used them for natural disasters, but also Montana and some of the Dakotas here have used it for Native American tribe communications and access to telemedicine. Yeah.
So basically, that what always kind of was mentioned by SpaceX in these webcasts when they talk about that it not only provides internet in the normal case situations, but also is able to provide internet in these situations where it's hard to get ground lines working.
Yeah.
That's kind of what we are seeing here, And what we are seeing over and over again with them being able to really being fast and deploying these and getting these ready for use.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's really cool that it can be used for something like that. And let's see. I don't know if we have any news. I know a lot of people are thinking about the AN 225 plane. There have been reports that it was destroyed, and then there were some reports that that's not confirmed. Has anything new come in on this while we've been on stream?
So let me start by saying where we were before. So the Antonov company out of Ukraine specifically tweeted that, and the last thing they specifically tweeted about the Antonov was 5 hours ago. That just said, it's the tweet that you see right there on screen. So no update from them. But as you said, we have reports from people on the ground. We have reports from Ukraine that it was destroyed. Or at least badly damaged. The reality is we just don't know yet exactly what the fate of the Antonov 225 is. Now, a particular note: the Antonov 225 was basically it was the equivalent of the shuttle carrier aircraft, designed to carry the Soviet shuttle Buran from its landing site to its launch site, and it was the largest cargo plane in the world. These are different than the Antonov 214s, which you see a lot in terms of transporting satellites around. But there is the Antonov 225 with the Buran during ferry flight testing in the 80s. So yeah, fate of the particular Antonov, and it's one of a kind. So its exact fate is unknown at this point.
Well, that is unfortunate. Go ahead.
Is that the Buran that is... The flight tests were mostly done with the Buran that now is in Germany, right? If I recall correctly.
In terms of the captive carry tests, I believe you are correct, but that looks like it might actually have been one of the quote-unquote operational ones. Of which there were a couple, although one actually only flew. So exactly how you want to define operational there, be my guest.
Okay.
But intended to be operational. But yeah.
Okay.
All right. Let me hit some of these super chat questions, and then we will get on to Starship. Let's see. CD Night Cape Town saying, how quickly can Elon help Ukraine with Starlink access? Days, weeks, your best speculation? Well, we sort of just talked about that. The dishes are on their way, right?
In times like this, it doesn't take long when you have the full backing of a multinational military alliance behind you to put some stuff on the ground.
Yeah.
So I'd answer it that way.
Yeah, it's not waiting for FedEx to get it there. It's let's get some real help and get it over there.
It's basically hours to days, more like weeks.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Dusky saying, should SpaceX make a recovery Crew Dragon where it can dock to the ISS and other regular Dragons for emergency situations?
I don't really know that we need it, because the one that sort of ferries the crew there and back serves as the lifeboat. And the way it would sort of work if there was, like, say, a medical emergency on board that required one of the crew members to come back to save their life, all four would come back. That is how we would do it. Because you do not leave someone there without a means of a lifeboat.
All right. And see, Thomas saying, with Roscosmos hanging ESA out to dry, is there anyone in the West with spare rockets to make up the difference besides SpaceX? The Japanese, perhaps?
So there was a tweet about medium lift launch vehicles. We are mostly talking about medium lift launch vehicles here, and there are really only 3 that are currently really there and have spare rockets. There's the SpaceX with Falcon 9. We have the Soyuz, which are the problem here, so they are not really. And we have the Long March series in China, which are also not really available here. So we are quickly and very quickly, when Vega is not able to do it, we are quickly talking about Falcon 9.
Okay. And then Rough Riders Show coming in saying, so with everything going on with this effect, will this affect the Russian cosmonaut flying on Crew 5 later this year?
Fantastic question. I wait to see exactly what happens here, but I have a feeling that we will not see a USOS crew member, and that includes Russia, Canada, and Japan. Sorry, that includes the US, ESA, Canada, and Japan. I have a hard time, based on the rhetoric of the last few days, seeing a path where we have crew exchanges. I hope I am wrong,
Yeah.
but I have a feeling we are headed toward only Russians are launching on the Soyuz, and everyone else will have to make use of the Dragon and the Starliners.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Until the
And
rhetoric changes drastically,
Yeah.
Unless there's no way right now. I would if somebody would ask me right now to predict that, I would definitely go with more likely no.
Especially since Europe is also actively turning off their science experiments on joint European-Russian science
wow.
platforms.
Wow.
That is how much this is coming to a stop here. Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Mr. Friendly B asking, what about the probable unavailability of the RD-181 engine for the Antares first stage and of the RD-843 engine for the Vega upper stage?
So yeah, the fallout to this to Antares will be interesting. We have not heard a lot about this from Northrop Grumman yet this week. I do know from an interview that I did with them coincidentally a couple of weeks ago that they have the Antares that they need for the CRS-2 contracts. So the flights that they are currently contracted with for NASA, they have them for, based on what they said a couple weeks ago. Now, what that means for the future is interesting, both from a first stage and an engine perspective. What this means for the Vega is also interesting because of Vega C, but the Vega, there's another sort of evolved element to the Vega that's coming here. So it's going to be interesting, because it is the Avum upper stage. So exactly what happens here? Will they turn to a exactly what are they going to turn to is very interesting. But I'm trying to find the exact reference to it right now, because there was something that we talked about where they talked about that they were moving to a European provider for something. I'm going to see if I can find it. But Adrian, what do you think about this and sort of the engine availability for Vega?
It's not optimal again, right? We are again in a situation where maybe they have. It's always the difference between are you able to support your current contracts? I'm optimistic that at least to these the question mostly will be probably yes, but then of course there is B. Are you able to help with the situation to support other payloads that now need a new so it's always the situation like A, can you even support your manifest, and B, can you help other manifests? So and even A is not given in this case, I feel. So it's and that goes for everything that we say about this topic. It's a situation where basically every day the news change about what is going on, even with the spaceflight topics that are related to this. So everything we are talking about today could be in a totally different situation next week.
Because it is worth noting that it's part of the payload adapter that comes from Roscosmos AB in Ukraine, and it is part of the onboard computer systems that come from and the engine as well that comes from Ukraine. So Ukraine is a part of the European space community. Very much so.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. I think we are. We're approaching an hour and a half here. I think we're probably going to go over a little bit.
Because I think there's some other things to talk about, right?
Yes, in fact, Keith asking, any Starbase news this week? CH4 question mark. And yes, there is some Starbase news. What do we got?
Adrian, you want to kick us off on this?
Yeah, I feel like the big news is the delivery of the new horizontal methane tanks. We had some cool views in the fog with Starbase Live, so we can see them here arriving. And we had 2 of them previously already at the launch site, and they're joined by 3 more. And yeah, we are getting closer and closer to more and more methane tanks, which are, it seems. Oh, I think one of you needs to. Yeah, I will reconnect and you need to pick up.
Yeah, we're gonna try to fix Adrian's audio issues, and so yeah, we're gonna let him sort of do a refresh and see if that helps.
But I think what Adrian was saying here is this is a very big step, right? Because one thing that we've been looking for are the propellant commodities that need to be there in order to support more of the fueling operations, the orbital flight tests, those types of things. So seeing these methane tanks beginning to arrive here, more large methane tanks arriving, really indicates how SpaceX is aiming to progress this over the next few weeks to months. And that sort of build out of the tank farm area, because Stephen, it takes a lot of methane to pump into this to make it go skyward, and especially to get it to orbit. 29 Raptors on your booster are thirsty, might we say.
Yeah, and it's very large, and these tanks, what's the relation here? Like, how many tanks is it going to take to fill up a Starship? Do we have a good number on that?
Yeah, am I clear again? Just to
seems
check
better.
That sounds better, yeah.
Yeah.
So it seems like about that 2 of these could almost support a full launch. So they might be just short of supporting a full launch. 5 of them for sure can easily store enough methane for a full launch. So
with the ability, it would seem, from what you just said, like to have multiple attempts on multiple days, accounting for boil off and everything.
Yeah, I would from the numbers that, of course, these are always numbers that people have based on assumptions we have, but it seems like 3 are needed probably. 5 can definitely do it, and like 5 full of these horizontal big tanks.
Well, this is sort of very similar. If you just replace methane with hydrogen, this is very similar to NASA and the SLS system, right? Where the SLS Block 1B, the one that we're going to see come out of the VAB in a couple weeks, the hydrogen storage sphere at 39A, can barely do it. It can barely do one attempt, but once you fuel it, you've got to stand down for a day or a couple of days between your attempts to replenish the hydrogen. So what you were saying there, if you only need 2 or 3 tanks, put 5. So you've got spare. Yeah.
And go ahead, Adrian.
And always you could have the situation where you have a static fire campaign going on before that. And it's, as we mentioned before in the show, it takes a lot of tankers to fill up for an orbital launch. So it's not always given that you could, if you go for quick succession, static fire to launch, that you would easily fill up that in a few days. It's a lot of methane they need to transport there in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Depressed Ant asking, because of the new tanks, does it mean SpaceX won't use the other big vertical tanks?
There were some, so clarification, we speculated about this on the show before, and it's still speculation, but there were some talks that that currently the methane tanks, the vertical ones, are not ready to use for some reason. We don't know any specific. That's just a speculation that is going around. I think the fact that they now added horizontal methane tanks that could support in case they're not usable kind of adds juice to that speculation, because they are obviously building additional capabilities.
Yeah.
And so far they are tanking these as well. They are not putting the methane into the vertical tanks, they're putting the methane into the horizontal tanks. So something is not usable there right now. I think.
And actually, I think at this point it's gone beyond speculation at this point, right? I mean, like the vertical tanks can't be used at this point, which is why we're seeing the methane tanks being installed and everything. And you know, Adrian, you had a very good point there too. We are seeing them actually deliver the methane and everything. And that is a very good indication, I think, of what they are intending to use at this point, right, going forward.
Yeah. Let's see. Other questions. Oh, I had one. Oh, okay. Megan Miller asked, the Starship animation in the most recent Starship update does not show the new forward flap placement. Did they ditch this concept?
I would not say they ditched it yet, because sometimes these render, like there's always the problem that at some point you need to tell your render, your graphic department, okay, please make a render for this presentation. And then there's always the fact that Starship changes all the time. So I feel like if you always tell the render crew to be up to date with Starship design, that might be hard. So I wouldn't read that much into this render. I think it was more a mission concept render than really showing every single detail about Starship.
Yeah, because I think that this presentation was very much more along the lines of, you know, for the last several years we've been telling you about this thing. Well, now here it is. So now let's tell you about what it's going to do, right? Instead of this sort of nitty gritty, what exactly changed. Yeah.
All right. And let's see. I do. Yeah. Okay. We are now officially over. So I would like to touch on this new series that we have, and we were just talking about propellant tanks. So let's talk about propellant tanks at LC-39A. We saw them in last week's episode. Well, let's see. What do I call in the first of this new series? We noticed that these tanks had arrived at the turn basin. Next to the VAB, but now we have spotted them at LC-39A.
Yes, we have, and I think that was honestly one of the parts of the video and the tour that you guys did when I started to see the photographs and the video come in, Stephen, that I was like, oh, propellant tanks! They put the propellant tanks there, like because to me, and I mean, like, you call me sentimental, but you know, like you can put a tower, you can do a lot of really cool things, but if you don't have the propellant tanks there, you're not going anywhere.
Right?
So,
yeah,
like,
you ain't launching.
So like the fact that the propellant tanks started to arrive to me was really this like, okay, like here we go. 39A is about to really change, but in a way, and I want to hit this point, like in a way, it's changing to be what it was originally envisioned to be.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
you know, it was built it was built during the Apollo era, but one thing that sort of gets muffled by history is the fact that those pads A and B were built to withstand rockets twice as powerful as the Saturn V rocket. Because von Braun, you know, whatever you think of him for his politics, he knew that if you did not build that pad to whatever your next thing was, which was Nova, the Nova rocket, Mars, Venus, things like that, if you did not build them and size them that way in the beginning, you were never going to get them. And he did it. So it's no surprise that 39A is the one that they want to hit first, because a lot of the ground preparation work to handle a rocket of that size is done.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not to say it's all done, but a lot of that preparation work is already done and was done in the 60s.
Right. Yeah, and let's see, what else did we notice?
Yeah,
We
I
saw
mean, Steven, this was
we,
you. Go
yeah,
for it.
man, it
Yeah.
was first of all, and I said it on the stream the other day. Thank you so much to the members and everyone that supports or watches ads or whatever, because without that, we would not be able to do this. So here's aerial video that was from Julia. She was operating the video camera, but we noticed a couple new things. As you can see here, there's more expansion on the Hangar X facility there. So I'll be anxious to see what that becomes over time. And also in our first video, we noticed the little foundations for the feet of the tower segments. You know, we saw the segments get built in Starbase, and then they wheel them out to the pad and they stack them as they do. And at first, for that first flight, we thought that, okay, they have 12 pads out there. They're going to build 3 segments at a time. Well, one of the surprises this time was new forms are being made to pour more concrete. Now, my question is, are they just kind of mid-work and there will be 2 more? Because if each segment needs 4 foundations, well, then you've got 2 kind of extra forms hanging out there. So I'm guessing they're going to build 2 more, or maybe some part of this only requires 6 rather than just 4. So we'll definitely watch that to see how that progresses. I'm hoping that the next flight that we take, we'll see concrete in these forms. So look forward to that. And then of course those are the little, I don't know, what are we calling these things? The footies.
The footies. Oh, I like that.
The tower segment footies. Yeah, these are recognizable from that right there, from Starbase, because that they would sit on that while they were constructing them and rolling them out to the pad to be stacked. Let's see. The other thing that we had was that.
Actually.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, that ring structure that we saw for the first flight, it's at a different level of completion. I don't know exactly what it's going to be. We have speculated in our back channels, like it could be this, it could be this. Maybe it's for the orbital launch platform. Maybe it's to put, starships. Maybe it's for a display, or maybe, we have no idea really what it's going to be just yet. But it's got a concrete ring around the outside, and then it looks like in the middle they've just poured gravel, right?
That's what it looks like so far, right?
Yeah, there we go. Now, yeah, see, that looks
like
Stargate. They're building a Stargate. Okay. Yeah, so if you haven't seen these videos that we've put out, we've now done 2 of them, and plan on doing another one here shortly. So make sure you're subscribed, because we're going to be putting these out pretty regular.
Because this is what makes me smile, because Boca has made me smile a lot, right?
Uh-huh.
But Boca has been a lot about testing.
Yeah.
Kennedy is about flying it.
Right.
Like this is where I might I start to get my space tingliness going, like they're starting to think about transitioning it out of testing, like
Right.
and thinking about like the lunar program, thinking about how Artemis is going to be out there, or SLS is going to be out there, later in March, and Starship is coming to 39A and the neighboring pad. Like it's just like like it's everything like I wanted as a kid, like starting to come true. Like I love it. And seeing it from the air must be amazing.
It is. It's so cool. I mean, I had taken a few flights on the port helicopter here, and for like 6 minutes or whatever. But to go up and fly around the Cape, it's a little bit longer flight, and it is a really cool experience. But as a photographer, you kind of settle in, and you're like, okay, now what do I want to see? And you kind of have to focus. It's sort of like watching a launch, where the launch is awesome, and the sounds and the sights and everything, but you have to just kind of laser focus on the task at hand. But it's really cool, and
because your eye wants to wander to all the other cool stuff.
Exactly.
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 Focus on the work.
Right. So yeah, thanks to everybody that's watched the video, and if you haven't seen it, get out there. There's a big team behind it. behind making these. It's not just me and Julia flying around in a helicopter. You know, Chris and Adrian here helped out with the script. We had Hagen doing the voiceover, the narration on it, and
Harry and Brady and Jack.
Harry
Harry,
and Brady and Jack, and so there's a big crew trying to make these really interesting for y'all. You know, we've obviously followed Starbase for a long time, and the daily videos are awesome, and they will continue to come out. The Cape videos are a little different because it's more of a big to-do to get footage and photos, and so we're really trying to make them good for y'all to keep them interesting. But I think we can go ahead and wrap now. I want to let me go ahead and clear out the super chats here. We've actually got a couple new members, so they will get special like sneak peeks at photos, and I think we even put out like a full length, just sort of the raw video from the flight, so you can just fly with us the entire time. So thanks for the La Rich, I guess, for becoming Capcom member, and Mason Massman for also becoming a Capcom member.
Thank you much, both of you. That's very much appreciated.
Yeah, and you'll get a lot of cool rewards for that. We've got our Discord, of course, but Chris B has been putting out some of these photos and videos to the members before anybody else gets it. So that's a major reason to become a member.
Yeah, a major shout out to the NSF Discord. It's becoming such a cool place to hang out there, hang out in the voice, play KSP together, and discuss rockets. It's such a cool place to discuss rockets, and shout outs on all the members there.
And shout out to whoever made an emoji of me. It's just me going like this from the photo that Julia took of us in the air. So
nice.
Thank you whoever made that. That was pretty awesome.
I haven't seen that one employed yet, and that'll be fun to see for the first time.
Yeah, it's in there somewhere. All right, so I've been your host. I'm Stephen Marr, and I've enjoyed being here with you all today. And over here on this side, I've had Chris Gebhardt. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed. And also just wanted to shout out to our moderators in the background who have done an awesome job with us too. Thank you very, very much for that as well.
All right. And then over on this side, we have Adrian Beil. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It was fun as always. I love it.
All right. And once again, members, you mean so much to us. We could not do this without you. There's all our launch directors and flight engineers. So find your name in there and pat yourself on the back for us, because we could not do it without you.
And I love that the text keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. I like that.
Yeah, we might in the future we might have to employ like a scrolling thing, like credits or something. But anyway, thank you for watching this week, and we'll see y'all later.
Propulsion continues to be normal.
RCP chamber pressure looks good. Toggling up. Roger, roll, Atlantic.
Water towers can fly! Yes!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight down, speed off. Bring in, speed off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.